right, I think we see some folks rolling in the attendees as here as well. So welcome. We're gonna wait for a couple of minutes to get more people to come through. So feel free to grab a glass of water, stretch, and we'll get started in just a few minutes here. All right, great. We're still having some folks roll in, but welcome. We're going to start and get kicked off here. So thank you for joining us today for our second webinar. Now Spoke is introducing this webinar topic on recruiting during tough times. So we have two amazing speakers here, Prabha and Arjun. And so I'm going to be handing over in just a couple of minutes. For those who came in, feel free to use the chat and introduce yourself. Say your name, maybe what school you go to, a fun fact. I would love to see who's here. And a little bit about Now Spoke. I'm one of the co-founders. My name is Leah Shin. And our mission is we really want to provide personal and professional development content for youth and young professionals all around the world. And so this series is a very first start on what this could be. And we're looking to explore different types of topics. The one today, financial literacy, product management, and a whole bunch of other ones as well. And so, yeah, if you haven't followed us on social media, you can learn more about the upcoming webinars, our mission, and get connected with us. And so I'm going to be handing it off to Prabha and Arjun to take it away from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leah, for having us. We are so excited to be here today. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully this is coming through all right for everyone. But awesome. So really excited to be here today. We're going to be sharing a little bit more about some recruiting tips that will hopefully help you during some of these tough times right now. Today, we are going to be walking through a little bit more about us, just sharing more about our background and where we're coming from, how COVID-19 has really changed the landscape of recruiting, and then also really providing a lot of tactical and specific tips around what you can do before, during, and after your interview to help set you up for success. At the end, we'll be going through the chat and answering some questions that you guys might have. So feel free to drop those in as we go through the content, and we'll answer them at the end of this presentation. So just to get started, my name is Prabha Dublish. I currently work as a product marketing manager at Facebook on the Facebook dating team. I have been at Facebook for almost 2 years now, so time really flies. Before that, I was working at Microsoft, also doing product marketing, so have been in the tech world for a couple years now. And really why this topic is so important to me is when I think back to my recruiting process, so much of what I learned and really why I'm here today is because of alumni and mentors who sat down and helped guide me through this process. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing some of those tips with you guys to hopefully help you as you move through your journey. Next, I'm going to hand it to Arjun to share a little bit more about himself.
Thanks, Prabha. Hey guys, Arjun, really nice to meet you all. I've been at FedEx as an e-commerce analyst for the last couple of years after accepting my full-time offer after doing my internship program there. Before that, I have a background in both sales and consulting, and I find my current role really gives me the perfect combination of being both creative and strategic. Like Prabha, I've been the beneficiary of some amazing career advice just throughout my entire journey, and there came a point where Prabha and I were sitting together just reminiscing on all the things we learned, and we just said, you know what, there is so much that we've picked up over our time that it would be criminal for us to let it die with us and not share it out. So hopefully we can put some good content for you guys today that can help you just get hired in COVID-19 and beyond. So without further ado, how has COVID-19 changed recruiting? You know, there's no sugarcoating it. COVID-19 will make an impact on hiring. We saw it in the 2008 recession, and we'll see it again. Every time the economy takes a hit, hiring takes a hit. And that makes sense. I mean, it's much more justifiable for a company to cut interns or new hires as opposed to laying off part of their existing workforce. But there is a silver lining. there are still jobs out there and you can get hired. We prepared an official how to get hired during COVID-19 checklist to give you guys the best chance at getting hired even through this difficult time. Number one, know your superpower. Every single one of you has something that nobody else in the world has. And I know that because each of your journeys are completely unique. You've had your own experiences and the combination of which nobody else on earth has. Really put some time in soul search. Think about what those things have taught you and find out what you can do better than anyone else and make that come out. Next, target industries that matter right now. COVID-19 has changed the business landscape tremendously, but there are some industries that are more relevant now than they used to be. Look at healthcare, e-commerce, anything that supports working from home. And you'll find that there are plenty of jobs available. It just might not be in industries you might first think to look at. Next up, when you're going for these positions, be very purposeful and deliberate when it comes to networking. I think it's easy to get really excited and try to put yourself out there and give out a bunch of business cards and connect with everyone on LinkedIn right away. But try to have an idea of where you want to go and reverse engineer who you talk to based on that so you can really ensure your chance of success. We're finding now more than ever that it's more important to have intimate, deep connections rather than just reaching out to everyone you know. Next, and probably most importantly, self-care comes first. One of the first things you'll find out as soon as you start a full-time job is no amount of money or no job is worth your mental sanity. Make sure you're sleeping well, eating properly, getting the right amount of rest, exercising, and it'll all work itself out. We promise. Next up, remember, it's your next job, not your last job. It's so easy to get into a trap where you've wanted to work at this place for the last 5 years and it's your dream job and it means everything to you. But just remember, you can still work there. That dream isn't dead. It just might be a year later. And who knows, you might love the next job that you do and you might find out that could be the dream job that you've been searching for this whole time. And finally, and what the majority of this presentation is going to be focused on is making yourself too good to deny, making yourself such a good candidate that as soon as you connect with anyone who's hiring, they leave saying, we must have that person.
Awesome.
Finally, we do have one practical website that we recommend using called Candor. We'll be sending this out afterwards, but it just kind of gives you a master list of all the companies out there, what their hiring processes are, just so you can have a starting point when you're going about figuring out where you want to go next.
Thanks, Arjun. That was really helpful. Now we're going to dive a little bit into what you can do before your interviews so that you walk in feeling really confident and prepared. So one of the biggest things, as we all know, is your resume. And this is really one of the first impressions that you're giving a recruiter and can be really, really critical when it comes to moving forward in the process. One of the first things to think about, especially when you're a young professional and you're trying to get into a career, is, okay, maybe I don't have any experience in product marketing. How do I get there? Really, the reality is, though, like, while you might not have the exact experience for the role that you're looking at, companies are very flexible, especially when it comes to young professionals. And until I got my first job in product marketing, I had no product marketing experience. But what I did have was skills when it came to working with other people, being data driven. Those are things that I developed in previous experiences that definitely can be highlighted on your resume. And so a lot of this is really just thinking about how you can reframe those experiences to better align with the role that you're looking at. Also, if you're thinking, okay, maybe I don't have those same skills, but I worked on this really cool project in school, can I include that on my resume? The answer is definitely yes. Relevant coursework can be really, really helpful, especially if you're looking at a new career and you might not have that work experience. Maybe it was a really cool project you did in school where you worked with other people. Those are really good things to add to your resume. They add another layer and texture that really can boost things up. Another thing to keep in mind is in these cases, quality is really more important than quantity. You don't need to put every single one of your job experiences on your resume. It's more important to pick the couple that will really resonate with this job that you're looking at and really dive deep with 3 to 4 bullet points about what was the impact that you personally had while you were there. That really shows a recruiter that, whatever experiences you've taken on, you've had a really big impact, even if you were only there for a couple months. That adds a lot of value and texture to the recruiter and when they're really thinking about what roles make sense for you. And you can take all those other additional experiences you have and put them on your LinkedIn and link them on your resume, but you don't need to put them all on your resume itself. And the last thing is that design is really, really important. So, especially if you're not going after a role that's very design focused, be sure to use a professional font type. Think about white space. If you have way too much text, it's going to be impossible for the recruiter to look at. And as we all know, most of them only spend a couple moments looking at each resume. And so you want it to be very clear and easy to read. So the recruiter can automatically be like, okay, problem solver, data driven. This is someone that I think makes sense for this role. So here's an example of a section that I had on my resume when I was working at Microsoft. You'll notice that I talk a little bit about the team I was on, how I sort of helped reduce processing time for this important process that the team had. I worked with a lot of different people across the company. And I also wanted to highlight initiative. And that's one thing that I think is kind of my superpower, is that I don't ever find myself constrained to a certain job. I like to take on additional work where I see opportunities. And so that was an additional bullet point that I added to my resume to kind of highlight that skill. But really what's most important is thinking about how you quantify. So, it's one thing to say that you researched and identified executives. It's another thing to say that you did that for 60 people. That really shows level of scale and level of impact. And there's so many ways to kind of quantify things, whether it's, you were one of 5 interns that were chosen, you reduced processing time, your work drove to this change in product. There's so much you can do. And it's actually something that can be really helpful to think about while you're actually in the internship or role itself. What are things that you can take and pull that'll help boost up your resume?
Perfect. Now, in addition to a resume, we always recommend submitting a cover letter, even if it's optional. Why? Your cover letter tells your story in a way that a resume never could, and it could get someone really excited to interview you before they even know who you are. More than that, it just gives you some clarity on how you want to pitch yourself and just an idea of the story that you're trying to get across before you even begin the hiring process. We have a pretty standard go-to format for how to best to do it. First, an intro paragraph, a little bit about yourself, and most importantly, why you want this position. It could be you've heard great things about the company, or the role aligns perfectly with what you want for yourself from a development standpoint, some combination of both, what have you. And then following that up with a couple of concrete skill paragraphs that are based on the job description. So that it could be creative, strategic, big problem solver, initiative, like Prabha mentioned. There's a lot of different ones that you could do. We recommend writing about 5 or 6 that you think you have, and then tailoring which 2 you want to copy and paste in based on the position that you're going for. But you definitely want to make sure you have that in there. And we understand that this is not an easy process, and this is incredibly tedious and pretty annoying. But if you have those paragraphs written out, and all you have to do is put in that introduction and I'm excited to look forward to interning or working for X company, all you really need to do is copy and paste and put it together, and that really reduces the startup energy of putting this together. But yeah, we want to make sure that you have a cover letter bank just so you can go ahead and put this together, just so you don't miss that opportunity. We've seen a lot of people submit cover letters. A lot of times it doesn't help, but it never hurts. And we can't reiterate the value of submitting it enough.
Awesome. Another thing that we know can be really overwhelming about this process is keeping track of where you're applied, where you are in the process. Especially if you're going after a lot of different companies, you're going to have many emails from various recruiters telling you about various stages of the process, and it can get really complicated. And so, especially if you are really detail oriented and like process, having a way to organize this can be super helpful. And so this is a format that we've used in the past to kind of keep track of what companies we're looking at, what job postings are available. A really tricky part, especially if you're looking at some of those young professional or entry-level roles, these roles only open up for a really short period of time, and they have really tight deadlines. And so it's really important to set calendar reminders and keep track of when things are due, because it really sucks when you miss one of those deadlines. And I've personally had that happen to me, and it's a really frustrating experience. It's also helpful to keep track of what connections you have. Who have you reached out to? Who's willing to submit a referral on your behalf? This really allows you to be prepared so that when that job is available, you have someone you can reach out to sort of help push you through the process or just give you advice. We also find color coding can be helpful as well, just to kind of keep track of where you are in the various process. Here's just an example of one that we have used in the past to just kind of keep track of the deadline, the links, people that you know, notes that you have, just kind of keep track of everything that's happening. And I feel like this is a really big part of just staying organized as this process can get really crazy.
Fantastic. Now transitioning towards behavioral questions. Behavioral questions are the most stressed part about any interview, and which is honestly, I think, criminal. It's the case questions that you could get are much, much more difficult because all of the behavioral questions you're going to get are going to come from a 20 to 30 standard bank that you can find online. We have one that we think captures almost every question we've ever gotten from a behavioral standpoint, and we'll definitely send that out afterwards. But you can also go to Glassdoor, and you might even get lucky and be able to find out what people for this position at this company were asked in their interview. Now, before going to the interview, it's really important to have prepared answers for almost all of them. You want to have at least a couple of examples for each. If you were the president of a club, you probably only want to talk about that one time. So you want to make sure you're covering a breadth and depth of experiences, but make sure you do practice them. And so that the first time you're saying it isn't in the actual interview itself. Do it with a friend. Prabha and I have mock interviewed each other countless times. And it's something that I think just gives you that clarity, and you don't want to be, if it's the first time you're saying something in an interview, it really does come across, and it can come across when you're making up stories or really exaggerating. So make sure you have that clarity, and it can really be a good shared effort. Prabha and I have kept a standard bank ourselves. Every time we get asked a question we hadn't seen before, we'll throw it in a Google Doc and we'll both practice our answers to it. It's a time intensive but very valuable activity to make sure you're not stumbling on what should be a pretty easy part of the interview. When it comes to answering these questions themselves, we'll go a bit more into specific questions later on in the presentation, but the biggest message I want to get across is that answers are stories. I learned this when I was working in sales, is you can get anybody interested as long as you keep a cohesive storyline in whatever you're telling them. There's three important parts of this, and it's very much a wheel. You can't have action and result without context, and the same applies for the other two. First, you want to start off by just painting a clear picture of what happened. Make them feel like they were there. Talk about what you did, what your role is. If it's a story, you're the protagonist. And most importantly, and so many people miss this, is why did it matter? Why did you make a difference in the outcome? Or how did you being there make some positive impact on the company or the situation? We'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but we'll talk a little bit more about just getting into the head of interviewers and interviewer psychology, talking about the root approach. What are you really being asked when you're being asked these questions? But for now, let's just say keep your stories cohesive and keep them nice and tight. You usually don't want to go between 2 and 3 minutes a question, because after that, interviewers just start to tune out.
Awesome. And so along with that, if you're kind of thinking about tech or product specific roles, companies actually also like to ask hypothetical business case questions. And these are a little bit different than the consulting case questions. And I'll give you an example just in a moment. But what's really important as you kind of think through these hypothetical case questions that you might get asked, you really want to know the products really, really well. And this is super important, especially if you're thinking about some of those more product specific roles. It's just having an understanding of, okay, if I'm interviewing at Google, like, how do I know like the pros and cons of YouTube? Like, who are their target audiences? What's working well? What's not working well? What's current news that I should stay up to date on? Because, what can be really tough is if you get asked a question and you don't even know the product and you're being asked to, make a marketing plan or think about user growth. It's so much harder to do that if you don't have previous context about, the product itself. So just as much as you can prepare about this, it can be really, really helpful. And practice is super, super important. Just like Arjun said, the first time you do this, it's not going to be perfect because it's just like any other skill that you're trying to develop. And so as much as you can kind of run practice cases and stuff are going to be very, very helpful. So here's an example actually of a question that I was asked when I was going through the recruiting process. So imagine you're a product marketing manager for YouTube. How would you grow the user base in the US by 2x in 6 months? And assume you have an unlimited budget. You can tell that this question is super open-ended. There's actually, hundreds of things that you could say in response to this that probably would be right, as long as you frame it up and provide, like Arjun said, the context of what's happening, think about it in a really structured format. How are you going to tackle this problem? What are things that you would consider? What are actions that you would take or things that you would want to explore further? What would be the hopeful or intended result of doing one of these things, and how would you measure it? And as long as you have a very strategic and specific approach to tackle these, and you answer your questions in a laid out format like that, that'll allow the interviewer to really follow your thought process. And don't be afraid to ask for a couple minutes. If you get asked this question, you're literally like, oh my God, I have no idea what to say. Be like, oh, this is a really interesting question. Can I just have a couple minutes to collect my thoughts? And so you'll see here that I have a couple of examples of things you could say, whether it's, going after new target audiences, creating new marketing campaigns, building new partnerships. I recommend picking maybe 2 or 3 ideas and diving into them. But this is really just to show that there's a lot of things you can say. It's really just about framing up your thoughts and answering it in a really logical format. Next, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we're now calling the semi-warm reach out. So as you guys are probably familiar in networking, we talk a lot about cold emails and reaching out to someone that maybe you don't know who might be able to help you learn more about a role or get a referral. And while that is a really important practice, when we think about the current situation and what's happening, recruiters are getting inundated with messages right now. And, professionals are the same. They're getting a lot of people asking for support or help. And so really making sure you have some sort of connection to this person, whether it's the same college that you've been to, maybe you guys live in the same area, maybe you've worked at a similar company previously, maybe you have someone in common. There has to be something that gets that person to click accept and have a conversation with you. And you want to provide as much information as you can up front. No one wants to get into a back and forth email situation about when you should meet or to learn more about you. Create a really succinct and brief email that provides all that up front. So that they have really clear understanding of, where they can add value to you in the process. And so here's an example email that we've used in the past. You're introducing yourself, you're saying, where you previously met this person, you're interested in a specific role that you came across and that you really just want 15 minutes to learn more. Also really recommend including specific times you're available in the upcoming week so that person can just be like, oh, okay, I'm available at this time too. Let's just schedule a time then. And attaching your resume and linking to your LinkedIn profile so they can get more information. You really just want to make it as easy as possible for them to really figure out how they can help and support you.
Brilliant. You're almost ready for the interview. The last thing you need to do before going in is company-specific research. Look, guys, especially when it comes to get to new hires or entry-level jobs, attitude will always trump aptitude. And think about it. We see so many great candidates from amazing programs with fantastic GPAs and what have you get rejected simply because they don't show the initiative and the interest to actually learn a little bit more about the company before they go in and apply. I mean, these companies, the smartest minds in the world are trying to figure out some of the problems that the companies are dealing with. It's not like somebody who has a slightly higher GPA is going to come in and be able to solve them immediately. They want to know that you as a candidate are someone who puts in the work and really wants to learn as much as they can because you take a genuine interest in it. So it's very important to know a little bit about the company before you go in and start firing off on your answers. There's a couple really easy ways to become an expert pretty quickly. First up, just talk to anyone who's gone through the process, anyone who's worked there. If you've had those networking opportunities, take as many notes as you can. Try to find out, what's the company's strategic priorities? What are the challenges the company is facing? Where should the company be going next? What makes the company different from the inside? You can even go just look up what the company's making headlines for recently, good, bad, or ugly. It's something that is good context for you to know that you can find all sorts of ways to work in through your answers.
Awesome. Now we're going to jump into sharing a little bit more about what you can do during your interview to stay prepared. And we're going to start off by sharing a little bit more about phone interviews, which are becoming all too common these days. Really, the biggest thing to keep in mind is making sure you're indoors and in a quiet location. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a call with someone and there's wind blowing on the phone and you can't clearly understand them. And I have to ask them if they can repeat themselves. That just sort of leads to a more awkward conversation. And you want to leave a really positive first impression. It's also really important to have a calculator ready. You never know when you're going to get asked a market sizing question or something that might involve doing quick math. And so just always be prepared and have that on hand. If you create a prep document, kind of outlining the company, those questions, maybe, important points that you want to hit, it's helpful to actually also have that printed out. It can be really stressful if you're trying to, control F and try to find a section of your document while you're on the phone. And so just having it ready and having all the pages laid out can be super helpful. Also recommend being flexible with time. Your interviewer will probably be a couple minutes late. They might want to go a couple minutes over if maybe, the questions took a little bit longer than they thought. And so just kind of budget for time and just be flexible as things sort of arise. And last and most importantly is to practice hanging up. This can be really awkward sometimes. So especially if you feel like the conversation is coming to a close, go ahead and thank them for their time. Say that you're looking forward to hear about next steps and wish them, a good rest of their day, and just kind of end the phone call there. So that's something really important to kind of practice.
Perfect. And we teased this out a little bit when we talked about the behavioral questions, but like I mentioned, behavioral questions are needlessly difficult. And we've put together 4 easy questions that come up pretty frequently that we see floor candidates on a routine basis. Our goal is that after hearing this presentation, if you get these questions, they're free hits and you absolutely ace them. So let's get started. Number 1, we affectionately call this one the coffin because it kind of makes you dig your own grave here. But the question is, talk about a time when you experienced conflict or failed and how you worked through it. Let's go back to the root approach, talking about what's in the head of the interviewer. The interviewer knows that everybody fails and everybody experiences conflict, adversity at some point in time. They don't want to know that. They don't want to know what your weaknesses are or where you fell short. They want to know how you handle it. There's a lot of ways that you will probably face adversity at some point getting hired into a company. These are very big challenges. Coming from school, there's no textbook answers to a lot of things. There will be a lot of adversity, especially early on, and the company wants to make sure you're well prepared to handle it. So don't do things like throw someone else under the bus. If you blame your group member or your teacher or your coworker, that's what you're going to do when something happens at the company. Don't focus too much on the negative. You want to show that, yes, this is something that was difficult, but like every story, it should have a happy ending. And most importantly, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, don't be generic and talk about the 1B you got sophomore year, because that just tells the interviewer that you haven't faced any real adversity. Find something that's serious and something that was actually very difficult for you, and make sure you're telling that story rather than kind of a generic one that they hear all the time. And make sure in this story you take some accountability. Talk about how you fell short during this time or what you could have done better. And then take that one step further and say, I learned from this. And then tell another story saying the next time something like this happened, I was so much better prepared and I learned from my mistakes, and the same adversity never affects me twice. All right, the next one, the Trojan Horse. We call this the Trojan Horse because it's one question masquerading as a completely different one. And it's on a similar line as the coffin. What is an area of weakness with yourself that you have identified? Again, everybody has weaknesses. The interviewer has weaknesses. They don't want to know what you're insecure about. They want to know that you're self-aware. Like the last one, don't give something that's actually a strength. No, I work too hard. No, I care too much. Like, think about things that you are genuinely not great at and talk about it. You don't want to be overly self-deprecating here, but show that you're a little self-aware. A great one to throw out is whether you might be very big picture oriented or too detail oriented. That's something that really can affect you as a professional, but it's something that shows that you at least have that awareness of where your strengths and weaknesses are. And then again, these are stories, they should have happy endings. Talk about what steps you've taken to improve and end this on a positive note. Tell them about a time where you had to, let's say you say you're not very detail oriented, where you had to be detail oriented and how you thrived in that environment. You always want to end on that positive note and tell it through a story format. Next up, the news flash. This one is admittedly less common than the others, but you might get it if you're especially looking at any analyst role that really requires you to keep your pulse on the news. But what is a current event that is of interest to you? What they really want to know is, do you check the news? Do you take interest in world events? And there's no partial credit for this one. Really know something that's going on, know how it impacts you or why you take some interest to it. Please stay away from anything that's super obvious or super generic that anyone knows about. it's kind of interesting when you throw out something and they're like, oh, I didn't hear about that. Like, tell me more about it. And they actually find it interesting. And of course, stay away from anything overly controversial. And finally, the Odyssey, the one question I can guarantee you're going to get in every single interview, but we see candidates mess this up so many times and it's completely inexplicable. Tell me about yourself. You know, people hate answering this question, but it tells the interviewer if this is somebody who I have to work with or sit next to, are they at least interesting? Do they at least have a cool story? So you don't want to go through and read off your resume or just talk about a bunch of things that aren't very meaningful, but if you've written a cover letter, that can be a great place to start. That can be a great place to say, this is the story I want to be telling. And this is a great way for me to just get in a quick 2-minute pitch about a little bit about me, what I've done before, and most importantly, ending it with why I'm here today and what I hope comes next in my story. This is a great place to add a little bit of personality and humor if you can. For instance, me personally, when I always tell my story, I lead it by saying, I'm a natural born problem solver. When I was a kid, and if I'd ever complained about my parents to my parents that that I was bored or had nothing to do, they would seriously take problems that they were having at work and make me sit down and solve it and say, don't bother me until you figured out how this works. And that really fit into my narrative of being a problem solver who can work in strategic environments. So those are 4 of the questions that we see come up all the time that people routinely miss. Hopefully after this, you guys won't miss them.
Awesome. As equally important is the questions that you are going to ask the interviewer at the end when they open up time after your interview. And this is something that can be oftentimes overlooked, but is really, really important so that you can get a better understanding about the company that you're joining and also kind of provide, a way for you to connect with the person that you're talking to. So the biggest thing to keep in mind is that people love talking about themselves. So you want to ask something that allows them to share more about themselves, what brought them there, like their opinion about the company, things that they like about working there. These are all things that you'll also notice are things that you can't find on the internet. You can't just Google and find these answers, but they're actually, opinions that this person might have that allows them to kind of share more and allow you to maybe connect further with the person that you're talking to. So here's some examples. If you think about Accenture as a company, you really don't want to ask a question like, how many departments does Accenture have? That's something that you could probably find online, and you don't really want to take up time during the interview to ask something like that. Even asking about, how the culture at Accenture differs from other management firms, that's also something that you might want to avoid, mainly because it's something you could easily figure out by talking to someone that's worked there. You probably should have thought about that in the prep process as well, because, they want to see that, you've taken that into account and thought about that before applying. And so you really want to avoid something like that as well. An example of a great question is acknowledging the information that you have and building upon that with an interesting question. So that could be, Accenture is widely known for its innovative culture. What do you guys do on an internal day-to-day basis to help maintain that reputation? So you acknowledge the fact that you already have done your research, but you're asking the interviewer something personal about what they're seeing or experiencing about culture. And it's a question like this that can actually also help you understand, is this really somewhere that I want to work? Because if they struggle to answer a question like that, then it might be an indicator that, their culture might not be as strong as you want it to be. And so it can be really helpful when you're evaluating opportunities.
Fantastic. So now your interview is all done. You feel really good about it. There's a couple things you have to do though before you can just call it a day. First and most importantly, send a thank you email. It's amazing. You'd think that this would be pretty self-explanatory, but so few people do it. If you send it, it truly does make a difference. Send it shortly after the interview, but before any decision has been made, and send it to everybody who took the time to interview you, because they have busy days, and they did, at least in their head, they took some time out to do something nice for you. So do really thank them and appreciate them. It's a great way to bring in some of the questions that you might have asked them in the last section to really influence that. So for instance, you could say, I really enjoyed hearing about Company X's amazing whatever and your personal experience working on project, whatever it was called. Just to add a little bit, just to show that you were really paying attention and make them feel good. It really makes a difference and can actually help you way after the interview. If you didn't get the position, you have a really good bridge that you can use to reach out again. And if you do get the position, you have a good relationship with somebody who might be pretty senior at the company who can help guide your career even after you get the job. So long story short, not many people do it. Please send a thank you email. There's one thing we can tell you.
Awesome. And then another thing to keep in mind is evaluating your offer. This can be really challenging, especially if you're going on these tight timelines. Recruiters sometimes ask you to give them answers in 48 hours, and so really thinking about this, after the interview and thinking about what's most important to you. Are you trying to get the most learning right now? Are you trying to work with some absolutely amazing people? Is it the pay or compensation that's important? Do you want to work in a certain area? Really having that kind of laid out and understanding your own priorities is going to be really, really helpful, because the reality is no job is going to check all of these boxes. And so at least if you understand what you're really trying to go after, it can really help you make decisions when timelines are tight and you have to give answers really quickly. So this really summarizes everything that we shared with you guys today, from building your resume to the interview itself, and thinking about the process after. We really hope it was helpful. I know it was a lot of content, so we really welcome any questions that you guys might have. And we can share out this information afterwards, but here is our email addresses in case anything else comes up after the session and you guys want to ask any more questions. You're welcome to reach out, as well as reaching out to us on LinkedIn. Either works. And now we can go ahead and open it up for questions if anyone has any.
Great. This was super helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through this. There are some questions for you both, so I'm going to read a couple. And so starting with the very first one here, how do we know which companies are hiring new grads right now?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Arjun.
Oh, sure. So that is a tricky place to start. We do have that candidate resource that we'll be sending out that can really give you a good starting point. That's probably a lot more efficient than going on a company website. But again, most company websites, if they do have a hiring page, they should either have a disclaimer up front saying we've halted all hiring because of COVID-19.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, I think another thing to kind of keep in mind as you're kind of going through this process is companies, like Arjun said, are being really upfront about where they are in a lot of these processes. And like, if you take a look at their career sites, oftentimes they'll denote jobs that are for new grads with like essentially saying university grad or new grad. And so really want to make sure that you're looking at those roles specifically. I've personally had people at Facebook who are new grads who have applied not to those new grad denoted roles, and they will almost automatically be rejected. And so really just also take into account the roles that you're looking at. Like Arjun said, a lot of these companies are still recruiting. So just leverage those existing resources to make sure you're being really targeted in your outreach.
Great, thank you. And to also add on to this question, our Now Spoke team has a list of resources for you all. So we will definitely send that out after the call as well. All right, so going to our second question here. With the recent layoffs in the tech industry, how can new grads get hired against industry professionals with much more experience?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that while a lot of companies are doing layoffs and are freezing their hiring, a lot of them aren't as well. So, companies like Facebook, for example, they are still actively recruiting in like product and engineering roles. And so again, like you just want to be very targeted in your outreach. But another thing to keep in mind, which Arjun mentioned earlier on, is that the job that you get out of college does not need to be the job that you've been dreaming about for your whole life. And so, for example, if the roles that you are looking at these companies require maybe 3 to 5 years of experience, the question that you want to ask yourself then is, okay, if I want to end up in a product manager role in 5 years, what are the 5 skills that I need to get now to get me into those roles? And then look at jobs and opportunities that can help get you there. And so it might not be at a tech company in the tech industry, but you could still develop the roles or of having great organizational skills or working really well with others in other roles, and then sort of transition into that later on. So I think that's just a really important perspective to keep right now. I understand that everyone wants to work in their dream job right after college, but I've personally found just from personal experience, that when I took a role in a place that I wasn't really sure about, or a role that maybe I wasn't sure if I was going to like, I learned so much from that experience. And I ended up liking things that I didn't ever expect because I hadn't even considered it. So I really recommend just keeping an open mind and really evaluating the offers based on, what's most important to you. If you really are trying to build those skills and learn more, you can do that in hundreds of different roles. And so just kind of keeping that in mind as you go through the process.
Yeah, and if I can add, when we see a lot of people getting laid off, it typically is people who are a little bit more senior and not some of the junior employees, which indicates that it's not an experience question, it's the price tag. And that's a big differentiation that young professionals have that some of their more experienced counterparts don't, is you can get them to work at a much more affordable rate. And in the times we're going in now, that's much more important than how talented you or experienced you might be.
Great. There's a lot of questions rolling in, so thank you all for your questions. Moving on, we have a third question here. How is reaching out to hiring managers through LinkedIn perceived as? Will this look like a circumventing a process?
Yeah, so I don't think it's viewed as circumventing the process, but I do think, given the current situation, reaching out to recruiters is just going to be a lot harder to get a response, mainly because recruiters don't really need to use LinkedIn to fill jobs right now. Just by throwing a job description up on a website, they're just going to get hundreds, if not thousands, of applications, and so they don't need to do as much outreach as they previously had to. So I would actually recommend thinking about going after professionals. There's so many of these posts happening on LinkedIn right now of people saying, I want to help people who have been impacted due to COVID, or I just want to support people who are looking for new jobs. Reach out to me if you want a referral. Reach out to me if you want to learn more. Those are the sort of people that I really, really recommend reaching out to, mainly because I think recruiters are just getting inundated right now, and it's going to be really, really hard to stand out.
Great. We actually had another question get submitted through a pre-webinar form. So the question that was asked, I'm going to read it, it's a little bit long, was, as a first-generation student, the entire post-grad experience is completely foreign to me. I'm hoping to learn more about the marketing industry and how to best present myself in front of employers. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to learn during quarantine. So wondering if there's any tips for first-generation students or those who traditionally don't have that resources and skill set and support system like other people.
Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel better that going through this process for the first time, we all feel completely overwhelmed, and we all kind of have the idea that it's easy to feel like you don't know what you're doing. But you're taking the first step now, just putting yourself out there and just learning as much as you can, and just trying to absorb as much information. The biggest thing I could really recommend for you is just go through one experience really quickly the first time, just to see what it's like. And after you do it once, it'll seem so much less scary, and you'll realize that you have the skill set to do it, and it's really no sweat.
Great, that's awesome. Moving on to our Q&A chats. What's a good strategy to follow up with someone you connected on LinkedIn after you initially connected with them?
Yeah, so this can be tough, mainly because I personally feel like LinkedIn is a fantastic platform, and it is great for doing that initial outreach. So you met someone at a conference, you send them a note being like, I really enjoyed your talk. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Let's connect on LinkedIn. But it is really hard when, especially, you have maybe thousands of LinkedIn connections, and, it's hard for you to keep track of the posts that they're making or updates that they're making to their profile, or, sometimes it's actually hard to remember where you might have even met that person. And so really what I want to encourage you to do is don't just send an outreach message because you feel like you have to. As someone who gets a lot of messages, the ones that I think are most beneficial and are really interesting are ones that are either, follow-up emails from someone that I've talked to who shared that they just recently got a job offer, or someone who saw recent company news about Facebook and wanted to share their opinion about it, or that, they recently connected with someone on LinkedIn who knew me. Those are the sort of things that I feel like make me feel like, I've invested time, and it's great to kind of get a sense that I'm helping, and there's some sort of follow-up situation that's happening that's good. Or it's something that's sharing new information that I might not know about that might be interesting to me based on my career or things that I've mentioned. So those are the sort of things that I recommend doing, and really don't recommend doing it unless you feel like you have something of value to share. Because otherwise, it might just come off as like you're asking for more time, and that's something that you really want to avoid.
Yeah, and if I could just add, take a lot of interest into the person you're reaching out to. Especially these days, people spend 90% of their time feeling completely overwhelmed. That's not an official stat, but you get the idea. Is like people are struggling in their jobs, and people would really like to feel like winners. Tap into that. Say, I'm really interested in what you do. But when I talk to you, it was really fascinating, and you can flatter them a little bit, and I think that really will increase your chance of getting a bite.
Great. I know we're running close to time and there are 3 questions left. So maybe we can start with a couple more. And for those who need to drop, you can do that. We want to respect your time. And we can also follow up with some answers post this webinar as well. So just letting folks know that we're just watching the time. So a question here was that they mentioned fantastic job, super helpful. They really felt that tell me about yourself question. They find themselves often debating the length of their response. I hear from some people to make it 5 minutes, others 10 minutes. What do you think is the best way to practice this?
So from a rule of thumb perspective, I like 2 minutes. Just keep it nice and tight. Maybe a little longer, but that's the standard question that some interviewers feel like they kind of have to ask you. So they might have, if you're going on for too long and it's a 30-minute interview, they might feel like that they might just feel like we need to hurry up and get to some other questions. So 2 minutes is, I think, pretty standard. Great way to practice it. Tell it to a friend, say it in front of a mirror, record yourself, and just see how it sounds. And it could be different every time. It probably will be based on the company and the role that you're looking for. But we talked about this a little bit, but I think the best way to get your head wrapped around giving your rocket pitch is writing a cover letter.
Great. Prabha, Arjun, do you have time for 2 last questions?
Yep.
Great. So a question here is for an interview, would preparing a presentation that highlights companies' current challenges and suggested solutions that can solve those challenges be helpful? Will that work?
Yeah, I think it depends on the company that you're going after. So if you're going after one of those large companies that have, thousands of employees, they have really gone through their process and made it as streamlined as possible. So if you're thinking about like an IBM or like an Amazon, they sending a deck like that, while could show a lot of initiative, is probably something that like the recruiter might forget about. It might not ever get shown. And they also typically have very standard processes when it comes to actually determining who's going to get an offer, which is almost always just primarily based on the interview itself. However, if you're thinking about a smaller company, like a startup, that might be a little bit newer, they probably don't have fully fledged out recruiting processes. And they actually, might not be 100% sure about like the role that they're hiring for. Creating a deck like that could add so much value because it shows like you're thinking about the problems that they're facing. You've proactively come up with solutions. And that is like what's so important, especially when you're in a smaller company and everyone's wearing every single hat. So I feel like it really depends on the company that you're going after, because you also don't want to create extra work for yourself that might not, add value in the long term. So really just kind of think through what company it is and whether they're sort of flexible in terms of like their recruiting processes, to make sure that you're, devoting your time in the right manner.
Yeah, I would be careful to just making sure that people at these companies spend their life trying to answer some of these questions. So just if you're going to bring something like that up, make sure you've at least talked to somebody at the company first to get some perspective. So it's not coming entirely organically. But the last thing you want to do is have them get defensive and say, no, we actually have this sorted out. And trust me, after Prabha and I can tell you, after working for a couple of years at a company, the people within the company have a much better understanding than anyone from a financial institution or consulting firm.
Great. And our very last question here, and you touched upon this earlier a little bit, but just any best resources that you all reference as you apply to jobs and grow your network.
Yeah, we had a couple that we did share. We also, of course, have our career playbook, and we'd be happy to send that link out too. That kind of has a few more resources linked in that could give you a good place to start. But I think you'll end up as you go through your journey, you'll end up finding that different things bring interest to you. But I think that's a decent place to start.
Great. So this reaches the end of our webinar. Arjun, Prabha, thank you so much for attending and walking us through this awesome career playbook deck. I know you do have a virtual a PDF version as well. So we will be following up for folks that did attend and register to get those to you. So thank you everyone for attending. And as we close, Arjun, Prabha, any last tips and recommendations you have for folks as they take these tips back home?
I think the biggest thing is try not to get too stressed out about it. I know it's like such a hard time right now. There's so much happening. And you don't have to have the perfect job right now. It's really important to just like keep an open mind, keep an open perspective, and really just roll with the punches. And you really have no idea, maybe taking that role that doesn't seem like a good fit could actually be totally fantastic for you. So really recommend just kind of, taking care of yourself and keeping an open mind.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll follow up and have a great rest of your weekend, folks.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
All right. Bye, everyone.